Great. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We are getting started with our workshop, The Prose of Parenting, and so glad to be here with David and Ibrahim, and I think we have Naomi joining in just a moment. Can't quite see or hear her yet. But also hello to all of you watching at home. This is going to be an opportunity, even though you're not here. Hi, Naomi. Welcome. We can't hear you yet, but sometimes it just takes a moment for the audio to kick in. So if you're watching at home, even though you're not here, you are participating. So go ahead and get your notebook and something to write with, and go ahead and you're welcome to follow in with the writing prompts and some of the information that I'll be sharing with our participants here on Zoom. So hopefully Naomi will come back in. But I was asking Ibrahim and David earlier just to take a moment to think about what brought them here today. It's no small thing to take an hour out of a weekday to come and take time for yourself to write. So I'll be curious to hear from them in a moment what brought them here today, and also some of their favorite people who are writing on parenting. And that'll be something that you all can use to introduce yourselves. Naomi, welcome. Can you hear me okay? If you can hear me, just say hi, Naomi. Hi, I can't hear you. Make sure that you're not. Are you muted?
Yeah, sorry, okay. I was muted. Awesome. I'm at home with the baby, so I don't want you.
You know what? Welcome. I mean, that's what we're going to be talking about as parents.
Okay. All right. Cool.
And I was just saying, Naomi, I'm going to take a little bit of time to introduce myself and to go over what our objectives are today. Okay. And in the meantime, I put out 2 questions earlier, which are what brought you here today, and who are some of your favorite people who are writing about parenting across genres. So it can be creative nonfiction, journalism, fiction, poetry. Just who do you like to read who writes about parenting? Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you all for taking this time to be part of this conversation today. It's, we're your parents. I'm assuming you all are parents. So it's no small feat to, especially in our current conditions, to pull yourself away from the task of parenting and working to invest in yourselves and just take time for yourselves in the middle of a weekday. So thanks for doing that. My name is Dani McClain. I am the library's Writer-in-Residence for 2020, which means that I get to host a bunch of great events like this for the Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library over the course of this year. I am particularly interested in talking about parenting for a number of reasons. I am a parent. I'm a mom. I have my daughter's 3.5. And I wrote a book when I was pregnant with her. I decided that I wanted to write a book about mothering, and I did. And it's called "We Live for the We: The Political Power of Black Motherhood." And I'll talk a bit more later about what prompted me to write that book and what I set out to do in the course of that book. So, and I should also mention that I'm a journalist. Prior to writing that book, I've been covering reproductive justice organizing for, at this point, I've been doing that about 7 or 8 years, which means that I'm covering the work that people do to really protect and advance our right to have children, to not have children, and to parent the children that we do have in safe and healthy communities. I think a lot of times when when reporters are focusing squarely on reproductive rights or reproductive health, they're talking a lot about abortion and contraception. These are important things to investigate and to write about. I was interested in bringing in parenting into that mix, so that we talk about, if we do decide that we want to have children, what are the ways that we can make sure that we are providing for them in the ways that they deserve. And sometimes that's like an individual task. That's the question of like, what are we doing as individuals? But often that's a question of like, what is the society in which we're raising them, and how are we accessing the supports that we need so that we can give them the education and the health and the the kind of general nurturing that they need and that will help them thrive. So what we're going to do today is as follows. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the work that I've done on parenting. And then we're going to quickly get into some prompts that will get you thinking and writing about what interests you. And we'll take some time to do that, and then we'll just come back and share if you're comfortable. It could be that you tap into something that you're not comfortable sharing with the group or on a Facebook live feed, and that's also fine. But I want this to be a true workshop in that you will have an opportunity to do some writing, to share it, and to get feedback from the rest of us about your writing and ask any questions that you might have about how to advance that writing and take it further. Yeah. Okay, it looks like we have someone else joining us, which is very exciting. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Amy.
I don't mean to interrupt. I almost forgot to come.
It's no interruption. You're welcome. You've got a little very cute child on your lap resting, so you guys are both welcome. I was just laying out what our objectives are for today, and I want to go ahead and get us started. I had asked everybody else as they were joining to think about what brought them here today and also who their favorite people are who are writing on parenting. So if you could each just introduce yourselves and share how you responded to those two prompts, I would appreciate it. And Amy and everyone else, you want to make sure that you have a notebook and something to write if you don't already.
Okay, you wanted me to start? I couldn't hear you.
No, I just wanted, you don't have to start, you're just joining, just take off a little bit to settle. But I was just wanting to make sure that you have a notebook and something to write.
Okay.
All right, who would like to get us started? Introducing yourself.
Okay. And Anna, what would you buy at the store?
I'm not going to call anyone because I don't really feel like it, so just go ahead.
I can start if you could remind me what the two questions were.
What brings you here today? So it's no small feat to take some time out of a weekday when you're parenting and working, what brings you here, and who are your favorite people writing about parenting? It could be any genre, so like poetry, fiction.
Okay, that makes it a little bit easier. Well, I used to be a high school English teacher, and I now have 6 kids. Here's 3 of them. You saw me holding one. There's another one over there. I've got a lot of kids, and I miss writing. So I've always wanted, I wanted to sit down and write about how the coronavirus affected my family and how it changed our lifestyle. And there's a lot of different things I'd love to write about, but sitting down and actually committing myself to doing it hasn't really happened. And then as for my favorites, this is what I just got this in the mail today. It's the 4th edition. It's backward for me. I hope it's not backward for you.
No, we can see it, the well-trained mind.
Yeah. Yes. It's a book about how to educate your children for the classical education. Because right now, I was already homeschooling my first kid. Now I'm homeschooling all of them, So I'm getting myself educated on how to educate my kids, different philosophies of it. That's just what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really exciting. You will have a chance to write today. I know so often, especially as parents, the challenge is even just finding a moment to write. And so we'll have not a ton of time, but a little bit of time to sit together and write today. And then also, I think, you bring up like coronavirus. I think figuring out how to do what we do in the context of this global pandemic is front of mind for a lot of us. So I'll have some prompts related to that as well. Thank you, Amy. I'm glad that you're here.
I can go. My name is Ibrahim, and what brings me here today is that I wrote a book about 10 years ago now. It seems like ages ago. And I've always enjoyed writing. I consider myself not very good at it, but I do love it still. So I just keep plugging away. And then I've had an idea about a book targeted for dads, like a dad's book, like a dad manifesto, really. And I did some writing about it a little bit in the past, and I just haven't found like the really the space and the time to kind of do more. So this seemed like the timing of this was like, oh, okay, let me just play with some of those ideas now. So that's kind of why I'm here. And frankly, I don't think there's been much parenting books that I've ever really like gravitated towards. I haven't really found any that I think speak to me. That's part of the reason why I wanted to write one. Just because I've always been like, because it seems like most of the books for dads were like, oh, so now you can't hang out with your buddies. Now it sucks to be a dad, and all this kind of like weird, and then also, anyway, so then there's this notion of like, toxic masculinity and how we come to show up. And so I really think that there needs to be some kind of tools for heterosexual couples or men that are in those types of relationships that anchor them, to give them some like a roadmap for how to be present and to be able to actually hold the space in a good way. So I think there's almost nothing really for us, and so that's why I'm here, to sort of play with that.
I'm glad you're here. I've had the pleasure of reading Ibrahim's writing for the past like 15 years, maybe 20 years. It's been a long road.
And it's not very good. It's still not very good, but I'm still plugging away. No,
I mean, I was at that lunch conversation about Green Bean, your book, over a decade ago. So yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Great. Who next? Naomi or David?
Yeah, I'll go. I'm Naomi. I am a novelist. I published my first book about 5 years ago. And I'm a new mom. I have a 3-month-old at home. And I read Dani's book when I was pregnant. And it was really wonderful. I actually have 2 copies because people kept giving them to me. And in terms of what brought me here today, I just am having a question about how to make space for writing now in this new setup. I was deathly afraid that I would never write again after having a kid. And so I'm just in an active space of inquiry about how to get it done. I'm working on actually several pieces right now, but mostly like in the notes app on my phone. So this feels like a big gift to be able to sit down and even for 15 or 20 minutes work on something. So that's it. Oh, and writers I like, other than Dani. Audre Lorde is a favorite of mine. And I just like the few of the Toni Morrison quotes that I've heard when she talks about her children. She didn't talk about them very much. But I really appreciate both of those writers talking about mothering.
Yeah. Naomi, how old is your little one?
3 months.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention I have 3 sons. I have an almost 9-year-old, almost 8-year-old, almost 7-year-old, and a 4-year-old.
David.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for letting me join you. I'm a civic engagement coordinator for our public library, and essentially I build relationships and partnerships with community organizations across the county, sometimes regions, to bring more resources to people in general. And we look through a lens of equity in everything we do, but my work focuses on hopefully bringing more resources to people that are more vulnerable in our communities with barriers, be it jobs or social services, to really trying to make connections to people that need the support on the library side and on the community side. So that's an honor. And another honor I have in my job is for the past number of months, I've been coordinating and working with Dani to schedule these events. And it's just been a pleasure to get to know Dani more. And the podcast, I hope you all have been listening to the podcast and so on. And why I'm here today is at my stage in life, as a white man, I am committed to listening to other perspectives all the time, all the people around me. It's really important for me to listen. So essentially, I wanted to hear what all of you will be talking about in your experience with family. And I'm sorry if it's kind of a deterrent, but I'm not a parent. I have 2 cats. But Dani's writing and has been encouraging me to think about my upbringing and my experience and what shaped my worldview, which changes all the time, of course. But now I'm of the age I can reflect on my 20s, and I'm kind of like, I don't think I was a bad person, but why did I view the world that way then? And I feel like I've evolved and strengthened my perspectives. I look at my privilege and my experience, and all of that leads me to wanting to listen to all perspectives around me. So I just feel more informed about what's like. I think you mentioned, Dani, the society in which we're raising children and social influences. I'm really thoughtful, reflective about all those social influences, and just listening to other perspectives. And the one writer I want to mention is Daisy Hernandez, because your podcast a few weeks ago, just what she was saying, but how she is going about writing her autobiography and talking to her mother in small chunks, so that it's not overwhelming or overly analytical, feeling more organic and personal. My parents are 89 now, and I'm blessed that they're with us and healthy. But my mom is starting to share stories with me that she never shared before. So I kind of liken that to Daisy, of her approach of kind of prodding her mother in gentle ways to talk about the parenting experience and what shaped Daisy and her writing and her worldview and all that. So I'm here to listen. I'm here to listen to how you are working with your children and raising them. Yeah, I guess I'll just stop there, but I really value other perspectives.
I'm so glad you're here, David. You're definitely welcome as someone who's not parenting. I'm so glad you mentioned like the importance of reflecting on our own childhoods and how we were parented, because that's a big part of what we're here to talk about as well. For folks, David mentioned Daisy Hernandez. She's an incredible memoirist, a journalist. She's a professor of creative writing at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And we talked a lot about her memoir, which is called A Cup of Water Under My Bed. I highly recommend it. And I did have the honor of interviewing her for the library's podcast. So check that out if you're interested. So, okay, let's get started. I wanted to just share with you some writing that I've done just to get our juices flowing. I thought about sharing, and I will share an excerpt from the book, but I went back and I was looking at some of the writing that I did when I was first getting started. And I wanted to share with you a letter that my agent asked her to write me. A letter that my agent asked me to write her when we were talking through the early ideas about this book. Because I think it's kind of helpful to think about how sometimes you can get started with a project about parenting when you just have the ideas swirling around your head. So hopefully I can figure out how to share my screen, and I'll read a little bit from this, but I want you to be able to read it too. There we go. Okay, assuming you can see a Word document, yeah? Okay, so this is a letter that I wrote to Tanya McKinnon, who became my literary agent and helped me sell We Live for the We. I wrote this letter to her in June of 2016. So I was pregnant. I was 7 months pregnant with my daughter. And there was a news event that had just happened here in Cincinnati. And Tanya had just asked me, like, we were talking about putting together the book proposal. And I had written a book proposal before, but I needed a reminder about how to get started. And she was like, just write to me what's on your mind. So this is what I sent her. I'll just read a little bit of it. In the past couple of weeks, the texts and emails have poured in from friends. They want to know if I'm going to write something about the allegedly negligent Black mother whose 3-year-old son toppled into the gorilla exhibit at the Cincinnati Zoo. They figure that since I live in the city where the story has unfolded, and since I often write about Black women, it's a perfect fit. There's an obvious need for a level-headed analysis that pushes back against the notion that if the woman had simply been doing her job, that is, appropriately mothering, zoo staffers would not have needed to kill the animal in an effort to save the child's life. This week, we learned that she will not face charges, though, as Hamilton County Prosecutor Joe Dieters put it, quote, if the mother had been in a bathroom smoking crack and running around the zoo, that would have been a different story, end quote. The stereotyping and cynicism, even in the midst of her exoneration, are clear, and it's difficult to imagine that Dieters would have made a similar comment had the mother in question not been Black. I don't plan to write the 800-word commentary that makes this case, but I would like to write the book that begins to answer these questions. How did Black mothers come to be so widely hated, mistrusted, and vilified in the US. What does Black motherhood actually look and feel like outside the common media narratives about ill-equipped single mothers and castrating matriarchs? Who is successfully pushing back against the damaging stereotyping and stigmatizing of Black motherhood, and how are they doing it? This exploration is personally important to me. I'm a Black woman who is 7 months pregnant and expecting my first child later this summer. While I've written about pregnancy and motherhood in the context of the reproductive justice movement for the past 3 years, the issues are now less theoretical and more real. I have searched desperately for culturally competent prenatal care and agonized over whether my race and healthcare providers' implicit bias affect the medical advice I receive. I consider the zip code where I live and what it will mean for my child's education if my partner and I stay in the neighborhood in the coming years. And I go on and kind of in that vein, talk about the book that I want to read. Ibrahim mentioned, like, in response to who do you like who's writing about parenting, like, nobody's written the book that I want to read. And I say that myself. I want to write the book I need to read right now. I talk about the books that I'm reading as a pregnant person. I love the book Bringing Up Bebe, which is this Pamela Druckerman is this white American who moved to Paris, and she's writing about how the French raised their kid. So I'm writing about like these parenting books that I'm reading and enjoying, but they don't speak to the experience of being a Black person raising a child and the kind of social and political concerns that this raises. So I wanted to share that with you. And I'm going to share one more piece. Hold on, where is that? Let's see. Okay, so this, you're seeing me right now, not my screens, right? Worry about being embarrassed by how much stuff I have on my screen right now. I'm trying to sort through it. Okay, so one of the things I mentioned in that letter to Tanya is like, what is the actual experience of Black mothering outside of the mainstream media narratives? And I wanted to share with you an excerpt from my book, We Live for the Week, that where I was trying to actually get inside like the quotidian, like boring, really universal aspects of parenting. Because while my book and the writing that I do on mothering, it hopefully is like hard hitting and like includes a lot of political analysis, my interest in writing about parenting is to partner that, the analysis and the kind of like contextualizing with the personal and the everyday. And so I wanted to share with you a piece of that. This is from a chapter called Play. And I'm just talking about what it's like raising my 18-month-old. My child is an only child. So in this chapter, I'm exploring like socialization, really, like thinking about how to start getting her around other kids. But this is a section that's just about the time that we spend together. For as long as I can remember, Iz and I have taken, my daughter's name is Isabel, I refer to her in the book as Iz. For as long as I can remember, Iz and I have taken long walks together, meandering around our neighborhood just north of downtown Cincinnati. When she is around 8 months old, I start pointing out the things I like to look at, attempting to draw her attention there as well. We stroll past a rose bush in bloom, and I situate her stroller so that she can reach out and touch the petals. Look at the flowers, honey, becomes, look at the red flowers, honey, and then, how many red flowers, honey, as she moves from infant to toddler. I use the walks to show her how things change, how the sunflower high up on a stalk in a neighbor's yard could be so radiant and strong one day, and just a few weeks later, bow its head and drop its leaves under the weight of age. When she is around a year and a half, she starts to express her preferences on the route, first pointing in a particular direction, grunting, and whining for a bit if I choose a different path. Then, at 20 months, that way, mama. The walks and our stops at various playgrounds become one of the many ways that I track her development. Around the same time, these first halting sentences appear. So does her ability to climb the steps of a play structure, sit down at the top of the slide, and come down on her own. Just a few weeks before, I hovered behind her every step of the way, nervous that she might plummet to the ground. And of course, we're always reading. It's fascinating to watch what from a book burrows into her memory. In a whimsical, bilingual Judy Morales book about Frida Kahlo, Frida bandages the wounded, bleeding leg of a deer. I explain that the deer is hurt, and so hurt becomes the word she uses for any deer she sees, and a favorite word in general. I don't pull her pants up quickly enough for her taste after a diaper change. Hurt. The straps on her car seat are uncomfortable. That hurt. She delights over the familiarity of the sun, hot, never sun. Birds, anything that goes roar. No sooner can I say the end than I hear, again, more, a two-punch command that shows up right around 20 months as well. So I wanted to share that with you because, as I was rereading that, I was thinking like, I'm so glad that I wrote that. Well, first that I noticed it and just like jotted it down in a notebook, and then that I included it in the book because, she's 3.5 now, and she already is like, what did I say first? And she loves to hear stories about what she was like even just a year ago. And that was really my goal in writing. Like I said, I was trying to make sense of this larger kind of context of Black parenting, thinking about Mamie Till, whose son Emmett Till was lynched. And like, what does Black parenting mean in the context of like vigilante violence and state violence? And I wanted to grapple with those things. And I also wanted to acknowledge just the simple joys and learnings that go along with raising a child. And so maybe one of those things speaks more to you than the other, but I just want to encourage you to know that there's space for all of it within your writing. Any questions or comments?
Oh, Dani, can you type into the chat box the name of those two books, Daisy's book and the Pamela's book?
Yeah, so Daisy Hernandez, her book is Cup of Whoops, Under My Bed. And then Pamela Druckerman, I think is her name. I don't know if you know this book. It's called Bringing Up Bebe. Can you see that, Naomi?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Ibrahim?
I guess I was just curious, like, do you ever feel like overexposed? like you're or like that it's not fair to is what you're sharing?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I have not yet, I'll say that. I'm glad that, for my purposes, I'm glad that I wrote it when she was so young, because I think most of what I'm sharing is like quite universal. It's not that specific to her personality. I would feel different if I were writing now, and I would feel more protective of what I was sharing. I don't share any photographs. Nobody in our family does. Her grandparents don't, her dad doesn't. We don't share any photographs or videos of her on the internet. That's a choice around protecting her privacy. And I don't really write about her much. I have written articles about parenting since the book came out, but I really try to focus more on my experiences, the choices that I'm making, what I'm grappling with, than exposing too much about her in her life. Only she will be the judge of that when she gets older and can look back and say, like, why did you feel the need to tell everybody our business? Maybe she'll say that. But I try to be respectful. And I'm a very private person anyway, so I don't find myself having to like hold back things that I would otherwise want to share. But thanks for asking that, Ibrahim, because it's something that I think about a lot, about how to hold that balance. But that question, so also I'm glad that you said this, because this is something I wanted to make sure to mention. I wrote an article recently about the experience of being a single parent during coronavirus, because, I get a lot of support in child rearing from my mom. She's a huge source of support, and we don't live together. So Isabel and I live in one home, and then my mom lives elsewhere. Her dad lives elsewhere. and her paternal grandparents also live elsewhere. So the community of people that cares for her is really out. It's like me, obviously, I'm her primary caregiver, but then there's like this whole community that lives in other homes. So this idea, you know, the public health guidelines that we've gotten in the past 2 months around like go in your house and shut the door, and that's what it means to be appropriately socially distanced. I was really like, I can't do that actually. Like, I just can't do that. So, because immediately I'm going to be overwhelmed and I'm not going to be able to do my work and parent her by myself 24/7. So I wrote this article about how do people who parent across households, how are we supposed to be safe in the face of this global pandemic? And I interviewed like epidemiologists and public health experts to try to answer that question around forming a bubble and like safety. How do you try to stay safe when you actually have to leave your home? And that is one example of like, I could have just felt embarrassed, right? I could have just been like, well, I'm a single parent, and like, I don't know, some people feel a lot of stigma and shame around that. And that could have shut down the inquiry. But one of the things that I lean into in writing about parenting is like, a lot of the things that we think are individual issues are often like structural problems that other people are grappling with. And so that's one way that I really push myself and like want, you know, something that really motivates me to write is like, what is it that's feeling heavy for me that's probably feeling heavy for a lot of other people? And is there anything that I can do by bringing my skills to bear on this question that could be useful to others? So I just wanted to
I have a question.
Yeah, Amy.
Is that article or the thing you wrote about single parenting and across households, is that something you'd be willing to share? Because
sure.
I know of several people in a similar scenario that they just completely disregarded social distancing. And I'd be curious how you made it work. And these people I'm referring to are not close. It's more I'm witnessing from a distance. And I'm just curious, as I said, it's single parenting, and the daughter has to go live with different people at different days of the week. And I'm not sure how, I never really thought about how they could have made it work. So I'm curious what your perspective is.
I just posted the link to the article in chat. It's an article that I wrote for The Nation, and it's called, I don't know why it's called I Never Felt Like a Single Parent. I never felt like a single parent, then the coronavirus hit.
Okay. So I'm unmuted. So you were able to find a way to make it work for you? Kudos for that. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's all about, so it's actually the conversation that more people are having now, as it's like as states are opening up and these guidelines are being relaxed, where people are like, well, how do I have friends? How do I date? Like, it's this question about forming a bubble across households, and then the agreements that you make with the people that you decide to interact with. So I basically started having, you know, my mom and I made agreements weeks ago about, okay, well, we're not going to see other people. So yeah, the article kind of goes into how we did it, how I did it, and other people can take. Okay, so I want to make sure that you all have time to write, because that is hopefully the gift of this time together. And I want to acknowledge the question from Facebook. Ashley D. Ferguson, thank you so much. We're going to come back and touch on that at the end. I love that question. Thank you so much for asking it. Okay, let me pull up. Oh, I do want to share one thing. Okay, so like I just said, you know, one of the things that got me into writing about parenting is, especially when you talk about motherhood, there's this idea that it's like not serious, right? It's like what's on the mommy blogs, and it's like, it's not serious journalism. It's kind of fluff. And as I said, to me, there are these kind of broader social implications about parenting for sure. And I wanted to get at those, because even beyond like the kind of individualistic approach that some people take toward parenting, like how can I resource hoard, or like, parenting is like going on greatschools.org to see what the test scores are for the schools in a particular neighborhood and deciding if that's where you want to live. Like, people kind of thinking about parenting as decision making that's going to be of use to your individual family. I was interested in like, how can I be a part of a conversation that's more about parenting in community and like what we owe each other and how we can support one another. And I just wanted to share this tweet that I came across, because the next step beyond that is like parenting and social change, which is something that I'm really interested in. And I saw this tweet that I just wanted to share with you all. I mean, I think you might know that yesterday 2 men were arrested, Gregory and Travis McMichael, for the killing of 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And this is he was killed. This is a Black man who was jogging through a neighborhood. He was killed by 2 white men. He was killed in February, and the arrest was just made yesterday as a result of a lot of kind of pressure that came about on social media and elsewhere. And I'm not a big participant on Twitter, but I read a lot of Twitter and learn a lot. And I just wanted to share this tweet that I thought ties into what we're talking about. I can figure out how to do it. Okay, so here's a tweet from John O'Reilly. You guys are seeing that, right? Question for the white folks on my timeline: what are you doing to make sure that you're raising children who won't kill mine? I think that this kind of speaks to something that David was mentioning about like the importance of thinking about like the social context in which we are raised and in which we're raising children. There are so many stories that there's so many ways to get into thinking and writing about parenting. And I just felt like it was interesting that this particular person immediately, and kind of taking in all this information and this breaking news about the arrest, as a mother, as a parent, her mind went to like, how can I go beyond keeping my child safe? What are you going to do to help me keep my child safe? And really putting that question to white parents. And then it's like this great conversation kicked off in response to her tweet. As you can see, all these interactions, 21,000 retweets, 73,000 likes, and then a white parent immediately saying like, well, this is what I'm doing, So I really just say this again to reiterate that when we think about parenting, it's so much more than how do I choose the school that's right for my kid? That's a critical question, but I just am so interested in more and more writing about parenting that thinks about how we are operating in relationship to other parents and other families. So just wanted to share that. Okay, let's get into the writing that you guys are going to do. If I can find my prompts. Here they are, I think. Okay. So here are some options to get you going in the next 15 minutes that we're going to take to write together. So it could be that that the earlier question of what brought you here today feels very alive to you. I'm jumping down to number 5, actually, and starting with number 5. Maybe that feels really rich to you, and you want to write about that. How can I find more time to write about what I'm experiencing? What was my own childhood like? What do I really want to say to dads? How can I educate my kids during this time that I have with them? So if that feels alive for you, go for that. If not, the first 4 are some prompts that I offer you. 1, how have the past 2 months since the stay-at-home order came down? How has this time changed your thinking about parenting? How has this time changed the practice of parenting for you? So not just how you're thinking about it, but actually what you're doing on the day-to-day. What are you proud of in terms of the parenting that you're doing? Or where do you notice fear, anxiety, shame, or regret arising with regard to your parenting? So let's take some time to write about that. Any questions before we get started? And if you're with us at home, write. Take this time, 15 minutes. All right, let's do it. So let's just take the next 3 minutes to wrap up. I'm shortchanging you on time just a little bit because I want to give us time to come together before we close out. Okay, just take the next minute to wrap up, please, or just to come to a stopping place for now. Okay, great. So thank yourselves for giving yourselves that time to just acknowledge and appreciate yourselves for giving yourselves time to reflect. Does anybody want to share anything, not necessarily what you wrote, but just what it felt like to write, or surprises that came up in the process of writing? Anything about the experience of taking that time for yourself?
I guess I get mad at myself that I don't take it on my own, but that's the first thought. Like, I like to write and I need to do it more.
Other thoughts?
For me, it definitely feels like a relief. Like when you start to think about things and listen to others, I start to kind of feel like it bottling up inside. Maybe it's because I'm thinking of so much at once and reflecting on memories of my family and being parented, but there's a magic kind of feeling when you actually start to put it down on paper,
Mm-hmm.
like for me,
Mm-hmm.
sigh of relief. And then now I have a number of ideas I'm going to be thinking about for this afternoon and evening.
Yeah.
So it's definitely cathartic and sparks more deep thought.
That's so great. Yeah, I would say, Naomi and or Amy, anything come up for you as you took that time?
Yes, you're going to laugh, the homeschooling mom in me.
Wow. Got a whiteboard? Get it.
I live by dry erase boards. We got like 8 of these in our house. And you notice that I had to change rooms. I'm now sitting on my child's unmade bed because I went through 3 IEP meetings today on this bed. It's the only non-bunk bed we have in our house at the moment. But I changed rooms because I was writing about my kids, and I don't want my 11-year-old to hear every word. I don't believe we'll get cut off at 3. I've sat through enough meetings. But my 11-year-old was probably standing right outside the door. But I was writing about my parenting of my 11-year-old, and it felt so good to put it on paper. And I think that's part of why I haven't written. I'd come from a family of people writing. So many family stories. None of us have ever officially published and sold, but so many family stories. My grandparents writing about their grandparents, and my mom, who had 10 kids, writing about all 10 of our pregnancies and labor and deliveries, and all these people writing. And I'm like, I've got to do that. I'm already forgetting my stories. And to put down on paper just felt really good. And my kids were shocked that I could write so much so quickly.
Great. How you feeling, Naomi?
I'm good. I really appreciated this, especially I took on the question of, where you feel proud in your parenting and where you feeling shame and anxiety coming up. And of course, I ended up taking on the shame and anxiety question first because it's so much easier to go to the negative place. But it was so helpful actually to be able to reflect on like the wins from the last couple of months, like still standing, and I feel like I'm actually doing pretty well. And yeah, that was just so useful to be able to put down on paper. So thank you for that.
Yay, I'm so glad. So yeah, I mean, you guys have already, I just would encourage you, as you were writing, anything that made your heart beat faster, put a lump in your throat, anything that made you feel like you had an emotional response to what you were getting down on the page, that's rich, that's gold. Keep going with that. It's generative, it's fresh, and that's what wants your attention. So I just encourage you to keep writing. When I was pregnant, right after my daughter was born, my agent she encouraged me just to take, even if it was just 5 minutes to write. So after I would get up in the middle of the night and pump, I would just I couldn't even think straight, but it was really helpful in getting outside of the idea that it had to be perfect, that I had to be like sitting down at my computer, feeling, clear headed. It's like, no, just read. There's a pen that you keep by the place where you pump milk, just scribble down a couple things. And some of those lines ended up making it into the book. So I just encourage you to make time for yourself, even if it's just 3 minutes or 5 minutes that you can give yourself to do this work. I'm glad that time felt useful. And I want to, there was a question that came from Ashley on Facebook. Do you always consider the larger context of history when writing about Black motherhood? Sometimes I feel annoyed that my work always has to be doing work or teaching a history lesson and not just being art. I guess it just comes out because it cannot be ignored even in my subconscious. Thank you for that question, Ashley. Yeah, I think you're right. Your question answers itself for you, right? If it feels like doing work, if it feels like you're forcing your writing in a certain direction for someone else's benefit, to do the work for them that maybe they should be doing for themselves, and that doesn't feel like your work, then that's not what you're called to do. Your writing is meant to fill your creative needs and to meet your creative urges. And so I encourage you to follow where your creativity is leading, and don't feel like you have to do that work for everybody else. I hope that's helpful. I also wanted to say, I think earlier I made kind of a flippant comment about your writing should go beyond where is my kid going to go to school. I just want to walk that back immediately and make sure that anything that you feel drawn to write about in the context of parenting is worthwhile for you. I actually have been doing a lot of thinking about everything that goes into making the decisions around where we send our kids to school. I'm reading this book right now called The Lost Education of Horace Tate, which is all about the history of desegregation and Black educators and Black families in the South, and the fight for desegregated and meaningfully integrated schools. So it's wide open. What makes your heart beat fast when you think about it? That's the writing that you should be doing about parenting. It is 3:02, and I want to be respectful of folks' time, but I also don't want to be rushed. Are there any burning thoughts or questions that you'd like to share before we close out?
I shared a link to a piece that I did about being a new father when I was a new dad. I think what I noticed about, because I zeroed in on the shame thing as well, Naomi. Not because I normally do that, because actually it's easier for me to talk about what I'm always like, hey, I'm good at this, I'm good at that. So that's normally easy for me. So I tried to do something that was a little more difficult for me. And I think I zeroed in on something that's really fascinating. It's like there's like lots of critiques about manhood and fatherhood in our society, but it's not like people are presenting like it's hard to find something where people are presenting like something that reconciles the sort of like this obsession with the future and obsession with innovation and creating something new, also with like deep reverence for the past. And I think that often we're like, well, we want to throw away everything that happened. So like for a lot of Black families, and a lot of families who like our parents were, their parents were the greatest generation, so they were tough and they were hard, and they treated their kids were just tough and hard. And so a lot of our parents went through a lot of stuff, just because that's the way it was. And a lot of that meant that the parenting was very different. And so we've sort of tried to address that and sort of so I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're making mistakes that we don't even know that we're making. And so that's what was coming up, was this idea of like, you might think that you're addressing it, but also there is some value in the way things were done in the past. And there is some flaws in the ways that we're conceiving of how things are in the future. And I guess that's the hard part that I get, is that you want to read a book that tells you what to do. You want to read a book that gives you like a to-do list or like a prescription or an approach. But it seems like a lot of this stuff is not going to be that, and that's a little frustrating. So I just wanted to offer that. Is that like the sort of the no right answers thing feels very applicable here.
It's so important. Thank you. Great. Well, Amy, do you have any last words? We turned your video off, which is just fine, but I want to give you an opportunity to share before we close out if you want to.
The option I wrote about, what did I write about? It was about
homeschooling. Yeah, no, I think you talked about how good it felt to write about your 11-year-old, which is great.
Well, actually, no, I wrote about parenting in general, but my 11-year-old would have taken that and committed every word to memory, and I just didn't want that. That's just what 11-year-olds do. But it felt really good. I think almost every day of coronavirus and of the quarantine schooling, I've thought, I need to sit down and write about this. This is once in a life, hopefully, once in a lifetime. This is historic. I've read all sorts of places where we need to have our kids journaling about it and our kids writing about it. And I haven't made my kids do it yet. And I'm like, it felt so good. Partly because we're so isolated right now that the only way I get to talk to other adults anyway is like a text or an email or something. So being able to write it down, even if it's just basically a conversation with myself, writing it, using also, I don't know, because I'm surrounded by kids all the time, using the skills that I, 4 years of college and a year of grad school gave to me. And I have these skills as an adult that I can write like an adult and not at the skill of my fifth grader. Right. It felt good to challenge myself. And it makes me excited to go and get on the computer, put on headphones, ignore my kids, and, write for the next 2 hours. And hopefully my house hasn't burned down in the process.
That's great. That's great. Don't want to put you on the spot, David, if there's nothing you want to share, but also just want to give the opportunity before we close out.
I just want to say thank you to all of you. It's been really important for me to hear these things. And Ibrahim, your article, I've started to read it, but didn't want to stray away from our meeting here. But I'm really going to pay attention to that. And Naomi and Amy, just thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's been really a great time. So thank you all, and Tammy.
Thank you all, and thank you to the library for just being a platform and a resource for all of us and hosting conversations like this. If you want to stay up on what the Writer-in-Residence program is offering, you can obviously keep your eye on Cincinnati and Hamilton County's library and all their social media handles. But also you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. McClain or on Instagram at Dani_McClain. Thank you to all of you. Keep writing, make time for yourself. You deserve it. And take it easy. Please be in touch if that would be helpful to you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.